Welcome to the D Shift Podcast, where we provide inspiration, motivation, and education to help you transition from the challenges of divorce to discover the freedom and ability to live life on your own terms. Are you ready? Let's get this shift started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the D Shift Podcast. And I want to thank you for your time and energy and effort for making it here to listen to this episode today. And you are not going to be disappointed. I have Ben Oofana, who is a gifted healer who began his training at the age of 20 with one of the last surviving traditional doctors of the Kiowa tribe. Ben works with people to heal their body and mind, to help them love and be loved, and to realize their full potential. Ben, welcome. Thanks so much for being here today.
Sure. Thank you, Mardi.
And Ben, you have such an amazing background. We've talked a little bit before. Can you tell us a little bit about what got you on this journey? Because you were really young when you sort of realized that this was your calling and passion.
Just even from early childhood, when the cowboy and Indian movies were on and natives were getting killed, I would be screaming and throwing fits. And so I had this something, I was drawn to Native people. And so by the age of 17, I know I'm skipping over a lot of things, but I took off on my own and landed in a community of predominantly Kiowa Indians in southwestern Oklahoma. And I was going into the peyote meetings with Native elders, and which is quite unusual because they normally weren't that receptive to non-Native people. But this older man who took in his nephew and was raising him. And so my friend said to his, the man who's caring for him, just said, "Hey, Dad, Ben wants to go in the peyote meetings." So I started going into the meetings, and it was in the peyote meetings that I met my mentor, Horace Delkai, who's one of the last surviving traditional doctors, the last of the really powerful doctors. And so I was afraid at the time because I knowing that a lot of Native people were, and understandably so, they weren't that receptive. They would say this kind of power, this kind of gifts of healing, it only works for Native people. And so I was afraid he would just say, "Well, you're white, you can't do these things." But I remember when I approached him, and he was staying at his cousin's house. And his cousin, when I stopped by before, blew me off, like, "What's this white kid doing here?" But when the cousin told Horace, then he said, "Well, when he comes by again, I want to see him. I want to talk to him." And so I'm physically shaking as I'm asked him. I just said, "I want to learn to do what you're doing." And he just says, "What are you doing this weekend? Can you start fasting?" And so he had me go out to the Wichita Mountains, sit in my car, not eating or drinking 2 days and nights. Nothing really happened much that time. He was just testing to see if I was serious. But within a few months' time, I was out on the Navajo reservation where he lived with his wife. And I began to assist him. And he would have me, the Vision Quest, you go out 4 days and nights with no food, no water. And he would, in addition to having me assist him, he would at times transmit portions of his own healing gifts to me. And I could feel this presence within my body. Sometimes it was so intense when you do that, it would momentarily knock me unconscious. And it has someone standing behind to catch me. and then it had me go fast like that. We fast alone in the mountains and to earn the right to work with these gifts of healing. And gradually, it took me a fair amount of time, but I started working with people. I didn't really know much of anything in the beginning, and I was afraid or fearful, like, what if I hurt somebody? I don't know what I'm doing, initially,
Right.
early 20s. But people were, I would, as I'd spend time with people, I'd tell them about my experiences and they'd say, well, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And I remember one of the first instances where uh, there was a couple I was friends with, and the girlfriend had broken her foot or something, and I don't remember all the specifics because this is going back 35 years ago.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But her then boyfriend talked about, he said he could feel this like intensely powerful force just slam down into the room and vertically. And then he said it spread out horizontally, filling the whole room. And he was sitting in a chair and he said that presence of that force was so powerful that he could barely keep his eyes open. And I was much more shy in those days, and I used to go to this meditation group that he would attend as well. And I was the cute college kid at that time and didn't say a whole lot. And sometimes because of my age, there was this kind of talking down to me a bit.
Sure. Sure.
And then when he described what he experienced, there was this dead silence in the room. It's like people are like, oh, like God. Like they were like, he's got this power and he just didn't let on to it all this time.
Right. Right. But so this is like, this really sounds like a life changing, like this wasn't like go to medical school and learn some techniques. This is really like, what would you call it? A gift, or is it a skill, or is it a gift, or how would you define it, Ben?
There are these transmissions that in various traditions, whether it's among Native Americans, Tibetan Buddhist, within the Hindu Vedic tradition, some of the yogis or gurus, there are individuals who possess these specific kinds of power, and they were passed down as transmissions, usually from just maybe one or a few individuals. And sometimes it's kind of frustrating. There are a lot of people who go through like 3-weekend workshops and call themselves master healers. But if something is so widely disseminated, it dilutes it and it gets polluted or corrupted. And so when there's these transmissions that are passed down in the various spiritual traditions, they're limited to one or just a few individuals at a time to carry that specific transmission. It doesn't mean that there couldn't be, like among the Native Americans, there were many extraordinarily powerful doctors in times past, but each one of those doctors, towards the end of his or her life, and there were people that possessed other kinds of gifts or powers. There were some that had the ability to call the rain in times of drought, and there are some who had a kind of gift or power that they could be in the midst of battle and people would shoot at them. There were accounts of some of these warriors that would fly into the midst of the battle when bullets and arrows would be flying at them, and all the feathers on their war bonnet were clipped, from
Right.
shot out with bullets, and yeah, the individual didn't have a scratch on their body.
Yeah. And so I think that that's a really good, thank you for clarifying that, because this is not like go take a course for a weekend. That's what I was hoping you were going to say, because I think this is really an embodiment of a tradition, right? Is what the gift that you've received through your mentor and through the transmissions that you've been able to receive. So
and it's
yeah,
also,
please.
it's an ongoing process too. For many years, I've been heading back to the Wichita Mountains, the Vision Quest, to go out the 4 days and nights without food and water, fasting. Because a lot of people, when they approach healing, not having any realistic or accurate models of healing, in this culture tend to dabble. They'll they'll do one thing and another, and they get bored easily, and then they're on to the next thing. And I even see that people who come in and they do a session or two and they disappear. And there are different factors there too. There's also the fact that when people are spending all this time on their devices, their smartphones and computers and all the social media, the endless scroll, and it rewires the brain. It's changing the neural structure of the brain, and also it's continually firing off the dopamine reward mechanism. And so we're developing this media-induced ADHD.
Yeah.
And whereas I'm also spent years training with a master from China in Xingyi Quan, Baguazhang, Tai Chi, Qigong. And even in that tradition, they start as children and they do hours of intensive daily practice and develop higher and higher levels of mastery. It's not like in this culture where people just, again, dabble, and there's this way in which a lot of people just want to get comfortable.
Right.
But you cannot sit still for very long. Either you're sliding down into stagnation or you're healing, growing, and evolving. And I could feel, even, I've been going in the spring and the fall and in the months leading up to the time when I go back to the Vision Quest, I feel the wear and tear. It's tough working in this culture because, like I said, a lot of people tend to dabble in healing, and the whole avoidance coping thing. Like, in order to heal, you have to truly be willing to go to those places where you're most vulnerable,
right?
To feel your authentic feeling responses. Because if you can't feel it, you can't heal it.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
And so, the consistency, the commitment and consistency, where I just bring myself back down to the Wichita Mountains, and, that 4 days and nights, it's brutal. No food, no water. Back in October, they had this heat wave, 88 degrees on the way up, 90 degrees day 2, 90, day 2, then 92, day 3. I was so thankful we had the cloud cover that came in and blocked the sun on day 4, because it was so hard to get through that. I think I slept 2 hours out of 48 hours on day 3 and 4.
Wow.
But it's so important that, a lot of us, we have this emotional wounding that goes back to our childhood, in some instances, even infancy, and not knowing how to work constructively with our own authentic emotional responses. We tend to suppress, deny, disconnect, distract ourselves. And that just reinforces our emotional wounding. And then there's the way it manifests in our body, whether it's, I'm not saying all physiological conditions are stress related or related to emotions we suppress, but it definitely plays a big role. It's
Sure.
A huge factor, and contributes, especially like digestive disorders, for instance. It's a very big part of that. And I find that the more I can get people to open up, system of meditation practices I've developed drop them deeply into the depth of their feelings and bodily sensations, breathing from the depths of what they feel that engages the body and mind's innate healing intelligence. That makes them receptive. And then when I work on the table, I'm like a conduit. Those of us who work on this level it's not just running energy. I mean, there's actual other forces or beings that descend into our body. And some people actually feel a sensation of either reconstruction happening in the body, or in some instances, even feeling like there's hands doing like surgical reconstruction within the body.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I think that what you're saying, it has, and that's one of the reasons why I think you're such, your perspective on this is so important, is that whole thing that, because a lot of the people listening are going through divorce. And so I think the natural tendency when you're going through divorce is to do anything else but deal with the emotional part. We focus on the legal battles. We focus on the, helping our kids through it, which is important. I'm not taking that away, but we don't give ourselves time to feel those emotions. And I like that. If you don't feel it, you can't heal it. So how do you see something like divorce playing into health issues, or mental or spiritual ability to emotional energy, all of that? How do you see that all tying in around how people typically go through the divorce, where they don't really allow themselves to feel what's going on?
The danger there is, because I was teaching classes on a weekly basis, walking people through these practices, helping them, teaching them the practices by which they can heal these deep emotional wounds. But the fact that so many people never learn to work constructively with their emotions, and even worse, they distract themselves. In some instances, you have many instances where, more often the single mother, but sometimes the father takes the responsibility for raising the children, and just doesn't really have much time for themselves. Yeah. But what happens is, when you go through a devastating breakup or divorce, it's you take this hit, it's a real body blow. And the sadness, the grief, the devastation. And so a number of things happen. Like, a lot of times when I look into people's bodies and minds, I just feel this deadening, this shutting down. At the time you're going through the divorce, there's all this, you're in the acute stage. That's when the emotions are their most intense. And the intensity will diminish in time, but it does not in any way mean that you have healed those wounds. A lot of times people flip up into their head and they're intellectualizing, so that to distance themselves from the pain. Or again, some people are just in survival mode, having to work a few jobs to support their children that they're caring for on their own now.
Right.
A lot of people self-medicate with alcohol and other recreational drugs, or go on pharmaceuticals like antidepressants. And so a lot of times what I see is that there's this deadening, like all those emotions, they remain trapped. A lot of it within the chest cavity, but also down the abdomen, other parts of the body. There's also, there's, as I said, the deadening on one hand, but often there are these still highly charged emotions that, if we can't access them and process them, they drop deeply into the subconscious mind. They're held within the body, but they operate from the subconscious. And so as we go forward, maybe we encounter someone else. Well, maybe that person we encounter could be a good match, possibly a much better match. But if we're so disconnected emotionally, if we're numbed out, we shut down emotionally, we don't process those feelings, those highly charged emotions continue to operate from the background. And we're up in our conscious mind, but those emotions in the background, but it creates a filter through which sometimes it could just create the walls or the barriers so we can't let that person in. Other times, maybe we react to that person. Something about them that they say or do reminds us, or kind of triggers past wounds, and there's this kind of reaction. And so, we're not able to be fully present in the moment. So it's So that's why it's so important for us to teach ourselves to be fully present. To one of the practices I teach people is that, say you're going through a breakup or divorce, you're either in the midst of it, you're in an uncertain place in your relationship, you're out the other side of the relationship. And when you can bring your current soon to be former or former partner into the forefront of your awareness, you see them and you feel their presence as if they're directly in front of you. But then you notice, how do you feel in your body? What specific emotions? Is it grief or upset or anger, sadness, feelings of betrayal? What are the actual feelings? One, and or first picture them. Two, what are the actual feelings? Three, where are these feelings situated in your body? Four, drop deeply into these, down into the depths of these feelings, and keep breathing softly and deeply, following the feelings and sensations as they go through their progression. This is critically important because you need to be able to digest your life experience. In this case, it's the divorce or dissolution of the relationship. You have other things going on simultaneously, like maybe you had to move, you have possibly children to care for. There's financial realities. You're not now pulling your incomes together collectively to make your way. Now it's like you got to come up with everything on your own, and even things like, well, who's going to fix my car now?
It's a lot of pressure. People, it's not just the divorce, it's the ripple effect that goes all the way through your life. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Not just the relationship. So I really love the idea. And this is not like, we've had other people come on that have talked about different healing modalities and everything. And so as somebody who wasn't really aware of all this stuff until probably, I'm going to say, about 10 years ago, when I really started to pay attention to it, even though they're very different cultures, you were with the Kiowa, some people were with like a particular, like an Eastern practice, or other people maybe were with some other kind of energy healing system or tradition. There is still that common thread through a lot of these trainings. Do you find that as well? That especially the very traditional trainings, that it's really, you have to be in touch, that there's, that there's blockages in the body, that there's these things that get trapped in your body that you have to overcome or work through. Do you think that's consistent, or am I just oversimplifying things?
I wish that was the case. No, there's such a disconnect on many levels. In more recent decades, in how do I refer to it, as a psychotherapeutic community, there's been tremendous insight and understanding that's been gained into these realms. Now, I feel psychotherapy is a critically important aspect of many of our healing journeys, but even then, there are limitations, because I was looking at an online course and offer for it today, and I've seen a lot of people go through years or even decades of psychotherapy, and I went through a few years myself, and there's the intellectual understanding, and yet it wasn't healing the actual trauma. And so it was instinctive that I began to develop this system of meditation practices. But even then, I would get so far just doing the practices alone. And then there's the need for intervention, which, exploring a lot of different therapeutic interventions, because I was in so much pain before, having suffered a lot of trauma in my childhood and having that carry over into my adult intimate relationships. But doing deep tissue body work, the two most powerful interventions I found is when I was able to find some gifted healers working on a comparable level, because that would begin to dismantle some of those deeply entrenched holding patterns where I kept reenacting a lot of those deeply traumatic experiences and also going on vision quest. But much of our populace doesn't, still has a lacking in emotional literacy, lacking in sophistication when it comes to understanding their emotional wounding. Again, psychotherapy is an important part. We need that intellectual component, but there are these other aspects of healing. Now, exploring other traditions as well. Like I've spent a lot of time in India and Sri Lanka, more in Sri Lanka, sometime in China, training with a master, two masters in these ancient internal martial arts that have their roots in the Taoist system. And even within the Hindu Vedic tradition, within the Taoist traditions, they didn't have as much understanding specifically as far as working with the emotions as I teach people to do. For instance, I'm not trying to say something's inferior or I'm better or someone's worse or whatever. That's not the intention. It's just there are very different sets of tools or resources. And even, for instance, when I was doing my own deep level processing of where a relationship had ended, was it 17 years ago now, there would be times where I would flip over and I would do Qigong practice I would dive into the depths of the grief and loss of that relationship. But then after a certain amount of time, diving into those emotions, then I would flip over and I would do Qigong practice for like 30 minutes or an hour or something. And so it's like when we combine these tools and resources, then we make far greater progress. One thing that's critically important too is that we go through, first, here we are starting out as children, and invariably we are going to internalize a lot of our parents' wounding, and no parent's going to be perfect. It's just not humanly possible for any of us. And I like to think for the most part that our parents were doing the best they knew how to do with the resources they possessed. Mm-hmm. And yet, in many instances, our parents themselves were wounded. They didn't know how to deal with their own emotional responses, sometimes because they couldn't cope with their own emotions. Maybe they were critical or dismissive of our emotions, sometimes even punishing us, so that because of that, we have this that shame that's instilled around our authentic emotional responses, and that can short circuit our ability to process our authentic emotional responses. As that, but as we grow into adolescence, we start forming romantic attachments on into adulthood. And so we partner up with certain individuals, and there are many ways that we are blind.
Right.
Yeah. See what we're getting ourselves into.
Right.
And even when it is a good match, like sometimes you could partner up with someone and I know people who partnered with high school and college sweethearts. So in our teens or 20s, if we happen to partner so early, it doesn't mean that we're going to grow in different directions. That, sometimes relationships have a way that there's a certain, maybe an expiration date. There's
Sure.
like a certain cycle that a relationship goes through. And sometimes you complete that cycle with an individual. And I know many people, there's this shame, feeling that they failed in some way, that they screwed up. And yet, I think it was Pythagoras that said, custom and nature do not agree for the many-formed custom without understanding nature.
Yeah.
Meaning that we form within our cultures or societies, we form a lot of these ways of doing things, say like married to death do you part.
Yeah.
And yet there's not this in-depth understanding of who we are as human beings,
Yes.
of our psyche as
Yeah.
individuals
Yeah.
and
Ben,
collectively.
yeah, but this we have covered. This is we could go on for forever, and I love listening to your insights. I think you have such a I'm going to use a way overused word, but such a holistic look at how this all evolves. And we may have to have another one of these. We may have to get on and do a part 2 of this interview, I think, to just
Sure.
get some more insight. Ben, if people want to learn a little bit more about you, well, before we do that, let's start with, what do you think, out of all the things we talked about, what's the one important point that you want to kind of have stay at the front of mind here?
It's critically important for us to the best of our ability, embrace our experience. We go through the breakup, divorce, even the death of a loved one, even though it can be shattering, devastating, and we don't enjoy it. We're not thrilled with it, but to the best of our ability, if we can embrace it and say, okay, this is my life path. This is how things are playing out.
Right.
These are the lessons I need to learn. And also, as by embracing it, what steps can I be taking on a daily basis? It's like, well, it's happened, so let's go ahead and work with it. If you don't work with it, it's going to do damage.
Yeah.
But when you embrace it and you work with the most effective practices, for instance, like I worked with the Qigong practices, that meditation practice I teach as well. So the practices and the therapeutic interventions, because if we don't deal with it, if we ignore it, if we busy ourselves, we internalize that wounding. We work with the practices, and the practices we can do a certain amount on our own, but we also need the interventions to facilitate the healing that we cannot fully do on our own.
Right.
So we need to embrace our experience, whatever it is, work with the practices, work with the interventions, and go forward with this understanding, this mindset. I'm going to take whatever happens and I'm going to embrace it. And I'm going to use it somehow, some way to heal and grow and evolve.
What a wonderful thought. And that's a great way. That's a great final message, that there is that healing, evolving, moving forward. If people want to reach out to you, find out more about what you do, is there a particular website or a way that they can get in touch with you, Ben?
Sure. There's my website is benoofana.com, just my name. I think it's on the screen here. So,
and I'll make sure it's in the show notes as well, so they'll be able to find it.
Yes. There's also, I'll provide the links for you so that you could include them. But there's, if you go to, what is that? I'll provide the link.
Okay.
I got so much on my mind, but there's a free ebook. Let me check it real quick while you're on here. Just a second. Gettingoveryourbreakup.com is the link. And also for those who would like to talk with me more extensively, I'll include a link that you can post with the podcast and the live stream, that if someone wants to get on I call it a challenge resolution heart-mending strategy session. So while I have a limited number of these times I can make available, but if you're going through a big challenge there, are in the midst of a divorce or breakup or something and you're struggling, you can feel free to reach out, and you could go on my Calendly, click the link, and schedule your own challenge resolution heart mending strategy session.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. That's very generous of you. Thank you so much, Ben. I want to thank you for being on the D Shift. I want to thank everybody for listening in. And Ben, this has really been insightful. So thank you for all your time and expertise and wisdom. Really appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
And I'd like to thank everybody for listening in to the D Shift. And don't forget to listen in again with a new podcast next week. Thanks for listening and supporting the D Shift podcast. If you would like to attend live trainings by our amazing guests and have a chance to ask questions and get answers from our experts, join the D Shift crew. For more details and to sign up, head on over to www.divorcecoachforwomen and click on the podcast page.